Let's jump right into today's explainer, where we're unpacking a story that is just incredibly emotional. It's called The Letter She Never Sent. We're going to dive deep into a bittersweet love story that literally spans an entire decade. This isn't just a simple recounting of events. It's a real journey through heartache, patience, and ultimately hope. So settle in, because we're about to explore how this completely unforgettable narrative unfolds.
So, let me ask you something right off the bat. How long would you wait for a promise? It sounds like a simple question, right? But man, it carries such a heavy weight. I mean, think about your own life for a second. Think about your own capacity for patience. Would you wait a week, a month, maybe a year? This question is basically the emotional anchor of this whole story. It puts us right in the middle of that painful conflict between wanting to move on and holding on to a promise made by someone you really love. Keep that in mind as we go through this.
Okay, so the story kicks off in this beautiful, warm, golden hour kind of memory. We meet Ethan and Mia. They're just 17 years old, living in a quiet, small town. And their bond was built on the simplest thing, literally just walking home together every single day. Now, the source material makes it really clear that this was an unspoken love. They never actually said the words out loud, but, everyone around them totally knew it. It's that pure, innocent teenage romance that just feels bathed in that warm sunlight you only really remember from when you were a kid. It perfectly sets up this deep connection they had before life got complicated.
And they were kind of total opposites, but they balanced each other out perfectly. Mia was definitely the quiet one. And Ethan? He was the guy who could always make her laugh, even on her absolute worst days. You can immediately see why they fit together so well. Ethan's humor was like a safe harbor for Mia's quieter nature. It just makes their whole relationship feel so real and lived in, which honestly is exactly why the sudden twist that's about to happen hits so incredibly hard. Because suddenly, out of nowhere one summer, everything changes. Mia's family has to move far away. And on her absolute last evening in town, right in the middle of all that heartbreak, she makes this final, desperate promise to Ethan. I'll come back. Now, this wasn't just a casual, hey, see you later. No, this was an oath. And this single promise becomes the ultimate turning point for both of their lives. It basically starts the clock on this entire narrative.
And this is where the brutal reality of that promise really sets in. Ethan chooses their favorite spot, this old train station in town, as his kind of anchor. He waits. But days turn into months, and months bleed into years. And before you know it, a whole decade has gone by. You can almost feel time speeding up as his initial desperation turns into this chronic, aching absence. That old train station morphs from a place of really happy memories into, well, kind of a quiet monument to a broken promise.
But eventually, human survival instinct just has to take over, right? Ethan stops waiting. After years of staring down those empty train tracks, he finally accepts his reality. He builds a new life, he gets a job. In fact, the story points out that he rarely even thought about the past anymore. He truly let it go. It's a sad but necessary moment of acceptance. And it lulls both Ethan and us as the audience into this state of quiet resignation, right before everything gets flipped completely upside down.
Fast forward 10 years later. That golden hour from their youth, it's replaced by a soft, rainy afternoon. It's a very moody, emotional atmosphere. And completely out of the blue, Ethan gets a small envelope in the mail. Only his name is written on it, and there's absolutely no return address. Just like that, a decade of forced forgetting is about to be completely unraveled by one mysterious piece of paper.
So inside that envelope is a letter from Mia, and the very first line is an absolute emotional gut punch. She writes, "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you." I just want you to let the weight of that sink in for a second. For 10 whole years, Ethan thought he had been abandoned, and this one single sentence entirely rewrites a decade of his life, completely reframing everything he thought he knew about why she left.
The rest of the letter finally reveals the hidden truth about those missing 10 years. She explains that her family was completely falling apart, and she disappeared to protect Ethan from getting dragged into that chaos. It was a sacrifice. But here is the most heart-wrenching part. She actually returned to that old train station every single year. She kept her promise in secret, but she was always just too afraid to walk up to him. So it wasn't just Ethan waiting all that time. Mia was trapped in her own silent 10-year vigil, totally paralyzed by fear and love.
Then she wraps up the letter with this terrifyingly specific instruction. She says she hopes he's found someone who makes him happy, but if he hasn't, he should look at the old station clock tomorrow at exactly 6 p.m. It is literally an ultimatum of hope. She distills 10 whole years of complicated, painful history into a single hour on a clock dial. Well, as you can probably guess, this leads to a completely sleepless night for Ethan. All that moving on, all that rebuilding he did, totally shattered. The very next evening, he goes back to the old train station. This place is where their past, present, and future are all colliding at once. You can just feel the hopeful, terrifying anxiety radiating off the story as he stands there, waiting once again.
You know how time seems to stretch when you're waiting for something huge? 6 p.m. hits. Nothing. Just the agonizing ticking of the clock. 6:01 p.m. Still absolutely nothing. Every single second feels like a year. The story tells us he was literally just about to leave, ready to give up one final time, when a familiar voice from behind him says, "Ethan?" The silence of 10 long years is finally broken.
He turns around. And of course, a decade has passed, so Mia looks older, different. But her smile is exactly the same. It's this gorgeous contrast between the physical passage of time and the absolute permanence of their connection. The outside world has definitely weathered them, but the core of who they are to each other, totally untouched. For a few seconds, neither of them even says a word. Then, Mia simply says, "I kept my promise. I came back." The release of 10 years of built-up tension is just palpable. Ethan just smiles through his tears and teasingly tells her, "You're 10 years late." And Mia laughs, saying, "I know." It's such a deeply romantic, heartfelt reunion. They didn't need grand, sweeping speeches, just the quiet acknowledgement of a promise that was finally fulfilled. It just brings the story beautifully full circle. They sit down together beneath the old station clock. That exact same spot that represented Ethan's loneliness and Mia's fear has been totally transformed back into their shared sanctuary. And the best part? For the first time in 10 years, neither of them had to say goodbye. The loop is closed. They're finally home.
So the crucial takeaway from this incredible story is simple but really profound. Some love stories don't end. They just take longer to begin. It completely reframes a delay. It's not a denial, it's just a longer runway. It reminds us that sometimes love doesn't just vanish into thin air. Sometimes it just patiently waits for the right moment and the right circumstances to finally come home.
I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on today. Does true love ever really disappear? Or does it just patiently wait for us to be ready? Ethan and Mia's journey really challenges us to look at the unresolved chapters in our own lives a bit differently, don't you think? Anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope this deep dive into their story has left you feeling inspired and maybe a little more curious about the enduring power of the promises we make. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you in the next one.